I've stayed in more hotels than I can count, but only once did I wake up to someone knocking on every door in the hallway, one by one, until they stopped at mine. That line has stuck with me because it's true, and because I still don't know what I would have done if it hadn't stopped there. I was on a long drive home after a week of meetings. It was the kind of trip where you're mentally fried, but you still have to push through because the next week is worse. Around 1 a.m. I decided I was done. There was an old roadside hotel a few exits off the interstate. Not one of those chains. More of a tired place with a neon sign that hummed, and a parking lot that smelled faintly of oil and exhaust. I'd stayed there once before when flights canceled. Nothing special. Cheap dry towels, the kind of carpet that looks newer in the lobby than it feels under your feet. The desk clerk was a college kid with a piercing who barely looked up from his phone. The room was on the second floor, toward the end of the corridor. Thin walls, a sagging lamp, that faint mildew smell hotels pick up over years. I remember ticking off the little things as I always do. Check the peephole. Make sure the deadbolt turns. Set my wallet inside the safe. It felt ordinary in that weary, travel-hardened way. I took a shower, turned on some mindless late-night show, and drifted off around midnight. Sometime after 2, something woke me. Not with the abruptness of a scream, but the odd, tiny pattern that lodges in your ear and won't leave. Someone knocking. Not on my door. It sounded further down, maybe 3 or 4 rooms away. At first I thought it was a late check-in, or someone going to the wrong room. The sound itself wasn't violent. It was polite, the kind of careful knocking somebody uses when they don't want to. Wake the whole floor. Knock, pause, knock, pause. The hallway was thinly lit, the exit sign spilling a sickly red under each door, making long bars of light on the carpet. I lay there listening, thinking I'd be clever and peer through the peephole. The hallway looked empty through the little round glass on the long strip of carpet and the rows of doors. The emergency exit at the far end. No one. The knocks stopped after a minute or two, and I told myself it was nothing. Someone stumbling drunk, a practical joker, whatever. I rolled over and went back to sleep. The next night I checked out a little earlier, convinced it would be over. I was wrong. At 2:07 a.m., I checked later because now I was exactly the kind of person who remembers times. The knocking started again. This time it sounded noticeably closer. Distant at first, then closer, then a slow cadence moving down the hallway like someone pacing while tapping the wood. Knock, down the hall. Knock, 1 door over. Knock, 2 doors over. Silence, knock, knock. It made the hairs on my arms stand up. I sat on the edge of the bed, my phone light barely illuminating the room, and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. No shadows, dark, but the knocks were coming. I called the front desk from my room, my voice low, and told the kid there was knocking on the floor. He checked the hallway camera for me and said, "There's nobody on the camera, sir." Looks clear. I felt ridiculous, like some sleep-deprived version of myself making trouble. Still, the image of an empty hallway and a sound that kept moving toward my door did not sit well with me. The clerk suggested it might be pipes or some loose trim settling. He offered to send someone up to check. I declined. I didn't want to wake the whole place, and besides, what do you do when the thing you're afraid of is an explanation you can't see? The third night I decided to stay awake and try to record it. If something weird was happening, I wanted proof. I put my phone on the desk, camera pointed at the crack under the door, lights off, and lay beside it. I told myself firmly that if any knocking started, I would open the door and confront whoever was out there. That was a lie, but it made me feel brave for the 3 minutes it lasted. At 2:13 a.m. exactly, the first knock came, slow, deliberate, like someone testing each door. My throat went dry. Knock, knock, knock. It rose and fell down the hallway in a rhythm. That felt too purposeful to be random. The sound stopped very close to my door, then softer, like a hand pressed flatter against the wood. Something felt like it moved along the frame. I could hear a breath. Not through the peephole, but through the gap where the door met the frame. A warm, low breath. The air under the door shifted slightly, like someone holding their body flush to the threshold. I could not tell you for a second what I was thinking beyond a single animal impulse. Don't let them know you're watching. Don't do anything that will let them know you realize they're there. I crawled to the peephole and pressed my eye to it. Nothing visible. But something was definitely on the other side. Something that was patient enough to tap every door in the corridor just to get to mine. Then very quietly something slid across the peephole from the outside. Not a shape I could see. Not a fully blocking hand. More like a shadow that muted the little round hole for a split second. like someone had put a sticker on it. I remember that freeze. The idea that my line of sight was being actively stopped from the other side. A voice, a whisper, maybe male, maybe not, so low I only caught fragments, came through the crack. Wrong room, it said. Clear deadpan, almost bored. There wasn't a threat in it. There was something worse, matter-of-factness. He knocked twice more, then soft his fingertips, then stepped back. The footsteps recessed down the carpet until they were gone. I slept, if you can call it that, in fits after that. The next morning I went down to the desk and asked to see the security footage. The kid at the counter smiled and said, "We don't keep footage for more than 48 hours. But I can pull the clip from last night if you want. Why?" I told him everything I'd heard and he went pale. He typed something into his little register, swore under his breath, and led me to a tiny back office. He booted the feed from the hallway camera at the end of our corridor and hit play. For 27 minutes before 2:13, the hallway camera showed nothing but static quiet. No figures, no movement, the exit sign as always. Then at 2:12:58, something appears in the video that was not there in real time. On the playback, a dark smudge seems to coalesce in front of the door 2 down from mine. It's not a person at first, more like a shadow that hangs in place. An absence where light should be. It stays there, impossibly still, then stretches along the carpet like spilled ink, moving one door at a time. When it reaches my door, the image on the monitor warps slightly, like heat haze, and then there's a tiny, almost imperceptible wobble at the edge of the frame where the peephole sits. The audio track, which is always quiet on our cheap camera, registers 3 knocks, but the video shows nothing hitting the door. After the knocks, the shadow recedes, as if someone pulled a curtain, and the hallway returns to normal. No figure leaves. No one walks away, just nothing. The kid in the office swallowed and said, "Sir, that's never shown up before. We usually get trespassers, drunks, kids messing around, but that looks like a smear. I don't know." He turned the monitor off then, as if shutting it might make the footage less true. I tried to bridge this with explanations. Heat, camera artifact, a trick of light. I wanted it to be nothing, but the footage is on a hotel server now somewhere, and the image of that dark thing moving with purpose down the corridor goes with me. I asked if they'd pulled the records for other nights. The clerk admitted, reluctantly, that there had been similar smudges on the tape before. Usually recorded at the same late hour and always on the second floor. No patterns, no arrests, nothing to give the police a handle. I checked out the next morning. I told myself I was being dramatic, that sleep-deprived brains make monsters of hallway carpet. On the drive home, I tried to laugh it off the way you do when you tell a story later. Yeah, it was probably the camera, old pipes, some drunk kid. But the thing I can't shake is how methodical it all felt. Whoever, or whatever it was like someone performing a ritual of attention. Knock every door until they find the one that opens, until that one had something they needed to know. Months later, I learned a small additional detail that made my stomach drop. The clerk had checked the guest register after my checkout and quietly told me that no one had checked into the second-floor rooms around those nights. We thought maybe a maintenance crew had been testing locks. We found nothing. The odd part was the first and last seen times on the register for the 2 rooms nearest mine showed no entries, as if the doors had been touched but not logged. When I asked the manager about it later in a terse email, he replied, "We keep strange records. We apologize for your inconvenience." That was the entire response. I don't travel as much anymore. When I do, I stay off the second floor if I can help it, and I keep a small flashlight and a folded towel by the door. I also make sure the peephole is clear, that I'm the one who decides who gets seen and who doesn't. People have asked if I reported it to the police. I did. They filed a report, they took the footage, and then they told me there was not enough to press charges on. The tape showed only a distortion. No prints, no footprints, no faces. The part that gets me sometimes, the part that keeps me checking the locks twice when I'm home, is that whisper. Wrong room. Not angry, not pleading, just a correction. If it had continued down the hall, I might have been one more room out of some slow tally. If it hadn't stopped at my door, I don't know how this story would end. So now, whenever I check into a hotel, I try to remember one small thing I learned the hard way. Cover your peephole, know the sound of your hallway, and trust the hairs on your neck when they stand up, because sometimes the wrong room isn't wrong at all. It's waiting. I reviewed hotel footage for a living until I watched myself standing at a guest's door, and I never left the security room. That sentence sits heavy with me because it's the truth. And And because there are nights I still replay that video in my head and try to find an explanation that isn't terrifying. I worked night security at a mid-sized 3-story hotel on the edge of town. It was the kind of place business travelers used when flights got delayed or construction crews took a long lunch, slick enough to look respectable, tired enough that something always felt slightly off. My shift started at 11 and ended at 7, and for the most part it was glorified babysitting. Check the cameras every half hour, log any weirdness, nod at the night clerk when he yawned, and make the occasional patrol of the parking lot when the wind kicked up. The security room was a closet of a space, stacked with screens, 6 monitors in a row, each one spitting out a strip of hallway with a red timestamp at the bottom. There was a perpetual blue glow, stacks of empty coffee cups, and a box of donuts in the corner that never seemed to get touched. Most nights the feed was boring. You see the same carpet, the same exit sign, maybe a suitcase being rolled down the hall at 2 in the morning. If you do your job right, you drift into a half-awake vigilance that makes you notice the smallest things. A shadow that lingers too long. A door that opens a fraction of an inch more than it should. Room 305 was always the little anomaly. Nothing dramatic, just an empty stretch of hallway outside it that sometimes looked different. On some nights the light there had a weird angle. On others the carpet looked darker. One of the clerks joked it was haunted. The easy joke that keeps people from asking hard questions. I laughed with them the first few times. But then, in the second week I was on the job, I caught the first clip that didn't sit right. It was just after 2 in the morning. I had my feet propped on the metal desk and a stale cup of coffee warming in my hands. On the 305 feed there was a silhouette standing in the middle of the hallway for no reason. I could see. Not moving, not pacing, just standing. The figure was a fuzzy black shape. No arms, no head. Just a vertical blotch in the camera's shallow light. I rewound, thinking it was a glitch, and the silhouette was still there. I clicked forward frame by frame and the shadow didn't flicker or dissolve. It simply existed, as if someone had paused reality for a minute. I went down to the corridor myself. Shoes whispering on the carpet. Staff flashlight cutting a cone of yellow light ahead of me. The hallway was empty. No shoes, no coats, no keycards in the slot. Nothing but the hum of the emergency exit light and my shallow breathing. I checked room 305's door. Locked, clean, quiet. I checked the camera feed again on a portable tablet. The silhouette was still on the playback, but there was no one there when I stood in that exact spot. I made a note in my log and told myself it was a bad feed, a faulty sensor. Maintenance would check the encoder in the morning. I slept like a man who had convinced himself something mundane. Explained everything. But the silhouette kept showing up. Always at roughly the same time, between 2 and 2:30 in the morning. Sometimes it lingered outside room 305 for 5 minutes. Other nights it would appear only long, enough to register, and then vanish on playback like someone had swallowed the light. My coworkers shrugged. Cameras are fickle, they said. You can get a dust blob that looks like a person on certain angles. One of them even suggested condensation on the lens. That's what I wanted to believe. That explanation was comforting, because it left no malicious actor and no unknown possibility lingering in the corners of the night. Then one night, a clip came up that couldn't be dust or glare or any explanation that made sense. I'd been up for hours cutting through the monotony, archiving odd clips, trying to spot a pattern. On the monitor, the silhouette appeared in front of 305 like it always did. I rewound. I watched. The figure seemed to elongate, then split into a vertical smear that drifted along the hallway like oil in water. Frame by frame, it moved, 1 door, 2 doors, sliding along the carpet. I stopped the playback and stared. My mouth tasted of stale coffee and something metallic. Fear, maybe. I notified my supervisor. He came to the room, rubbed his eyes, and watched the footage. For a full minute, we both sat in silence while the monitor showed a blackness that behaved like someone walking without feet. He ran his hand through his hair and said what all professionals say when a job gets weirder than it's supposed to. We'll put a tech on it. Could be interference. He called maintenance and told me to keep logging. He left with the tired confidence that someone else would make it a solvable problem. I didn't sleep that week. Instead, I set up a secondary camera, cheaper, cobbled together, from a spare lens and an old VCR. That still worked, and I angled it so it pointed directly down the corridor where 305's camera had a blind spot. If something was a trick of one lens, 2 lenses would show it. If something was a trick of light, 2 angles would prove it. If none of that explained it, Then I would have proof something beyond routine was happening. It was at roughly 2 in the morning. On the third night that the footage did something I'll never forget. On monitor 1, room 305's feed, there it was, the silhouette. As always, in the center of the hallway. On monitor 2, the cheap camera I'd rigged, there was also darkness, but in a place that should have been empty, directly outside the security office door. The timestamp ticked like a heartbeat. On the playback, the smear moved down the hall on monitor 1, and on monitor 2, the same smear appeared as if stepping out of the feed and onto the floor, tiles outside the room where I sat. I looked up from the screens toward my office door. It was closed, padded with the routine hush of the hotel at night. I stood up, the chair squealing on its casters, and walked very slowly to the door, listening. No sound. I cracked it open a fraction and peered into the hallway. Nothing. The only motion was the faded wallpaper and the exit sign's unblinking light. I walked back and watched the screens. On the monitor, the smear halted outside my office door and lingered. The hair on my arms stood up in a way that felt both animal and absurd. The footage showed something outside my door at 2:12 a.m., a thing I couldn't find when I looked. Panic is a strange thing when you've been trained to be calm. You don't sprint, you don't shout. You take notes, you log. You call people who tell you it's probably fine. I called the front desk and told them to run up a check. They did. 2 minutes later, a front desk clerk appeared in the doorway, flashlight cutting the same cone of light I'd used earlier. He looked at the hallway, shook his head and said, "Clear. Probably a glitch." We kept the clip. We showed it to a manager. We filed an internal report. We even called the local police. Not because I thought a cop would arrest a shadow, but because I wanted a record outside of our little hotel bureaucracy. The officer sat across from me in the break room, watching the playback, then turned the volume up on the feed. There were no footsteps. The audio was a hummed silence. He frowned, asked if the cameras had ever recorded any actual trespassers, and then told me they'd dispatch a unit to check the premises later that night. They found nothing. No prints in the carpet, no evidence on the door frames, no disturbance in the dust along the corridors. The police's final note, filed at dawn and summarized in bureaucratic politeness, was that the footage was inconclusive and there was no probable cause for anything further. It was officially an anomaly. I would have left it at that if not for the last clip. I was cross-checking logs one afternoon when I pulled up an archived file from a week earlier, something I'd skimmed and thought was boring. On that recording, my office sat empty at 2 in the morning. The timestamp scrolled, and then like a bad echo, the footage showed a figure step into the hallway and pause. Directly in front of room 305, I rewound. The shape's head angle was familiar. The posture, hands down, shoulders slightly slumped, looked like mine when I leaned on the counter. The file froze, and I realized the figure's coat was the same cheap jacket I wore on shift. The face, it wasn't clear, but the outline, the way the shoulders slouched, the tilt of the head, it looked like me. I paused the tape, heart hammering. I thought of fatigue, of the nights I walked out to check doors and grabbed a smoke while pacing the lot. Maybe I'd left and not remembered. Maybe I'd blacked out and the footage was just catching my sleepwalking. I tried to match dates with my logbook, with my swipe card sequences, with anything that might prove I'd left. The entries said I'd been on shift in the room at the time. The card reader showed no exit on my card. No entry in maintenance logs, no motion triggers. On paper, I had never left. I quit a few days later. Small, rational moments pushed me over the edge. A recorded figure that looks like you. Camera artifacts that behave with intention. A manager who shrugs and says, maybe the building moved. People who work the night shift become a weird class of superstition-holding professionals. You collect things you don't tell your friends. I told enough people to get the footage into a police archive, and I left files on the manager's desk. He later told me he'd keep it in case of patterns. That phrasing, pattern, was the part that kept me from sleeping. I moved out of town within a month. I don't work security anymore. I don't watch monitors for a living. But sometimes, when the house is quiet and the hallway light hums, a memory flits across my mind like a screensaver. A black shape, patient and still, occupying the thin stretch outside 305. And the tiny, awful thought that maybe when you stare at the thing on the screen long enough, it starts to stare back. And sometimes you don't even notice the moment you both become the same image. When I worked night shift at a hotel, I used to hear a TV playing in the room next to mine. The problem? That room hadn't been booked in over 6 months. That line never stopped haunting me. Because I wasn't supposed to hear anything from that room. No voices, no TV, not even the hum of power through the wall. But for months I did. I was working as a night receptionist at a small roadside hotel in Colorado. 50 rooms, 3 floors, nothing fancy. The kind of place people used for one night on their way somewhere else. To save money, the manager let me stay in one of the staff units on the top floor. It wasn't big, just a converted guest room with a microwave and a twin bed. Mine was room 312. The room next to mine, 313, was always locked. The manager told me it was under repair for plumbing issues. He said it casually, like it was nothing. But over time, that room started to feel like the center of everything wrong about that building. The first time it happened was my 3rd week there. It was close to 1:30 in the morning. I had just finished checking in a trucker and gone upstairs to my room to unwind. I was lying on the bed half asleep when I heard it, a faint, muffled TV. It wasn't loud, but it was there. Soft dialogue, a laugh track. The kind of canned laughter old sitcoms had. At first I thought maybe someone had finally checked in next door. But when I looked at the booking system on the front desk computer, room 313 was still listed as out of order. No one had stayed there in months. I went up to check anyway. The sound got clearer the closer I got, muffled voices. A burst of laughter, then static. I stood outside the door for a moment, listening. Then I knocked. Instant silence. I used my master key to open it, expecting maybe to find a maintenance worker testing something. But the second I opened the door, the air hit me, cold and still, like the room hadn't been touched in ages. Everything inside was covered in a thin layer of dust. The bed perfectly made, the curtains drawn tight. There was no TV, just the faint smell of old cigarette smoke and stale carpet. I stepped back into the hallway and closed the door, trying to rationalize it. Old wiring maybe, or sound traveling through the vents. But that didn't explain why it stopped the instant I touched the handle. The next night it happened again. Same time, same muffled TV laughter. I knocked again. Silence. When I opened the door, the air was still cold. Unchanged.
This continued for nearly a week.
Always between 1 and 3 a.m. Always that same faint laughter behind the wall. Then one night, the front desk phone rang. I picked it up. Front desk, this is Alex. At first, nothing. Just a low, soft static. Then faint, slow breathing. I froze. Hello, who is this? Click. The line went dead. I checked the phone log. The call came from room 313. The next day, I asked my manager about it. He looked up from his paperwork, visibly annoyed. That line's disconnected, he said. There's no way a call came from there. But I saw it. He cut me off. Don't mess with 313, you got it? If you hear anything weird, ignore it. It's not your problem. He said it with an edge that felt like more than frustration. Like fear. After that, I couldn't sleep properly. Every little creak in the ceiling, every hum from the vents made me jump. Still, I kept hearing that TV. Sometimes it would fade into static, then back to dialogue. Other times it sounded like someone pacing. Slow, deliberate footsteps. Drag. Pause. I wasn't the only one who noticed. A coworker named Ben, who covered the front desk on weekends, told me, "Man, what's up with that room next to yours?" I swear I heard people talking in there last night. That was all the confirmation I needed. The following weekend, Ben and I decided to check together. It was 2 a.m. exactly. We stood outside 313 and listened. Sure enough, faint TV sounds. Old scratchy laughter like a 1960s sitcom. Ben started recording with his phone while I unlocked the door. When the lock clicked and silence again. We turned on the lights. Everything inside looked exactly the same. Clean. Still. Lifeless. But this time there was something new. A faint indentation on the edge of the bed. Like someone had been sitting there. And the air smelled stronger now, like burnt tobacco. We played back Ben's recording. But there was nothing. Just silence. Not a single trace of the laughter we'd both heard moments earlier. That was when I decided to set up proof. I borrowed a maintenance camera from the supply closet, an old CCTV unit they used for parking lot security, and placed it in the hallway, facing room 313. Every night I reviewed the footage. For 2 nights, nothing happened. Then, on the 3rd night at 2:13 a.m., the exact time the laughter usually started, the doorknob to room 313 began to slowly turn. The door cracked open about an inch, then gently shut again. No one in frame. No movement. Just that quiet, deliberate motion. I replayed it again and again, trying to find a shadow, a reflection, anything. There was nothing. I brought it to the manager the next morning. He looked tired, pale. He didn't even finish watching the clip. Instead, he sighed and said quietly, "Drop it, Alex, please, just let it go." That night, I couldn't. I went through the old hotel records, scrolling through booking archives from the past year, and that's when I saw it. 6 months ago, the last person to stay in room 313 was a man named Harold Green, a long-term guest. He stayed there for 3 weeks, until the day police were called. The report was short. Deceased on arrival, self-inflicted. After that, the hotel closed the room and listed it as plumbing repairs. No one ever checked in again, until whatever this was started. I confronted the manager one last time. He didn't even look at me when he said, "We don't talk about 313, not anymore." Then he walked away. I decided right then that I was done. I packed my things that night, planning to hand in my keys the next morning. At 2 a.m., I woke up to a sound that froze my blood. A TV, blasting on full volume. But this time it wasn't coming from 313. It was coming from my room. I sat up. The screen was glowing blue, flickering through static, showing shapes I couldn't quite make out. I reached behind the dresser and pulled the plug, but the TV didn't turn off. The sound just kept going. Laughter, overlapping voices, and then silence. And then, through the wall between my room and 313, a whisper. "Why'd you stop watching?" The voice was so close, I could almost feel the breath of it seep through the drywall. I ran out down the hallway barefoot, key still on the nightstand. I didn't stop until I was outside in the parking lot. Cold air, empty road, and above me, one light still glowing in the third-floor hallway. Right outside room 313. I quit the next morning. Didn't ask for my last paycheck, didn't go back for my things. A few months later, I looked up the hotel out of morbid curiosity. It was still running, but room 313 wasn't listed on the website anymore. They'd renumbered the entire floor, skipping from 312 straight to 314. They say every hotel has a story, but some rooms never really check out. And sometimes, even when the door's been locked for good, someone still turns the TV on.